The tension that had been building since Gatsby and Daisy's reunion reached its tipping point as the summer sweltered on. The heat itself seemed to stoke the simmering emotions, making every glance, every word between them and Tom, sharper and heavier. West Egg and East Egg might have been separated by a stretch of water, but the emotional bridge between the two had become a battleground, one that was about to erupt. It started innocuously enough. Daisy invited Gatsby, Tom, and me to her house for an afternoon get-together. The air inside the Buchanan mansion was thick and oppressive, despite the fans whirring futilely in every corner. Daisy sat languidly on the couch, dressed in white as always, a picture of careless elegance. Yet there was something taut in her movements, suggesting her nerves were fraying. Gatsby arrived dressed to perfection, his confidence seemingly restored, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease when they landed on Tom. For his part, Tom was all booming laughter and bravado, but it was clear that he had begun to suspect the truth. As we sat in the suffocating heat, the conversation turned to trivial matters, but the undercurrent of hostility was impossible to ignore. Gatsby's gaze rarely left Daisy, and she, in turn, looked at him with a mixture of longing and guilt that only seemed to infuriate Tom further. "I suppose the latest thing is to sit back and let Mr. Nobody from nowhere make love to your wife," Tom said suddenly, his voice cutting through the fragile veneer of civility like a knife. The room fell silent. Daisy looked down at her hands, while Gatsby's face hardened. "You're being ridiculous," Daisy said finally, her voice trembling slightly. "Let's go into the city. It's too hot to sit here and argue." The suggestion seemed to diffuse the tension momentarily, and within minutes we were piling into cars. Gatsby and Daisy took Tom's car, while Tom insisted on driving Gatsby's, with me and Jordan in tow. The arrangement was pointed, deliberate. Tom's jealousy and insecurity were on full display, and he wasn't about to let Daisy slip further away without a fight. The drive into the city was stifling, the heat radiating off the asphalt in shimmering waves. Tom was silent for most of the ride, his jaw clenched, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Jordan and I exchanged uneasy glances, but neither of us dared to speak. When we finally reached the Plaza Hotel, we took a suite overlooking the city. The tension followed us in like an unwelcome guest. Daisy tried to lighten the mood, ordering iced drinks and suggesting we play music, but it was futile. The storm that had been brewing all summer was about to break. "You know, Gatsby," Tom began, his voice deceptively casual as he leaned back in his chair, "I've been meaning to ask you, just where exactly did you say you made your money?" Gatsby's eyes narrowed. "That's my business, Tom." "Oh, I'm sure it is," Tom said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "I suppose you've got one of those fine Oxford educations too, don't you?" "I did go to Oxford," Gatsby said, his voice steady but his hands clenched at his sides. "I went for 5 months. It was an opportunity they gave some of the officers after the war." Tom let out a bark of laughter. "An opportunity? Listen to this guy. You can't repeat the past, Gatsby, no matter how much money you've got." Gatsby's face darkened, and he took a step closer to Tom. "Of course, you can repeat the past," he said, his voice low but charged with emotion. "Why, of course you can." The room seemed to hold its breath. Daisy looked back and forth between the two men, her face pale. Her usually serene composure was cracking, and when she spoke, her voice was small and pleading. "Stop it, both of you. Please." But Tom wasn't done. He turned to Daisy, his voice rising with each word. "Do you know what kind of man you're leaving me for?" "He's nothing but a bootlegger, Daisy. That's where all his money comes from, selling illegal liquor and who knows what else. Do you really want to throw your life away for someone like him?" Daisy flinched as though she'd been slapped. Gatsby turned to her, his expression softening. "Daisy," he said gently, "you don't have to stay with him. You never did. Tell him the truth. Tell him you never loved him." For a moment, Daisy seemed on the verge of doing just that. Her lips parted, and her eyes met Gatsby's with a flicker of something close to desperation. But then she looked at Tom, and whatever courage she had mustered seemed to evaporate. I can't say that, she whispered. I did love you, Jay, but I love Tom too. Gatsby's face fell, and for the first time, he looked truly defeated. Tom, sensing victory, leaned back in his chair with a triumphant sneer. That's it then, he said. Why don't we all go home? The drive back to Long Island was even more tense than the drive into the city. This time, Tom and Daisy were together in Gatsby's car. Gatsby, Jordan, and I followed behind in Tom's. Gatsby was silent, his expression blank, as though the fight had drained every ounce of energy from him. As we neared the Valley of Ashes, the oppressive gray landscape seemed to mirror the mood inside the car. Suddenly, there was a commotion ahead. A crowd had gathered near Wilson's garage, and as we slowed down to see what was happening, I felt a chill run down my spine. A woman lay crumpled in the road, her lifeless body illuminated by the harsh glare of a nearby street lamp. It was Myrtle Wilson, and from the way the onlookers whispered and pointed, it was clear she had been struck by a car. Tom's car. When we arrived back at the Buchanan house, Gatsby lingered outside, his eyes fixed on the light in Daisy's window. He insisted on waiting there, just in case she needed him. Tom won't hurt her, I said, trying to reassure him. He's done worse, Gatsby replied, his voice hollow. I'm not leaving her alone. As I walked away, leaving Gatsby standing vigil under the moonlight, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing on the edge of something irreversible. The storm had broken, yes, but the damage it had left behind was only just beginning to show.